None other than the audience. Oh, I therefore speak none other of the audience. And because of that, I want to thank you as well for your service, because what people don't realize is that if we as healthcare professionals don't work with you, then we are never going to overcome this virus. So what we're going to do today is a bit different. We're actually going to pose questions out to the audience, and they're very realistic scenarios, and we want to hear your input. Anybody is welcome to answer, and then between myself and Dr. Allick, we will then kind of give our take on it. So at that time, we'll ask you to unmute the mic, but after, if you could just mute back the mic to decrease any feedback. So the first question goes out to any of the males in the audience, and you are relaxing under the porch, and your grandson comes up to you and say, "Papa, I miss school. Why can't I go and play with my friends?" What do you tell him?
I'm the host, so I get to pass the buck.
Okay. I see a Ramming on the line, a Leonardo Ramming. Do you want to have a go at that one?
I'm not a papa yet, so I can't tell you what I'll say.
That's fine. That's fine. It could be your nephew. It could be your nephew. He just says to you that he misses school. What do you tell him?
I don't know. Tell him that right now he can't go to school.
Why?
Because of the possibility of him contracting the COVID-19 virus. But okay. I guess I will have to break it down for his level.
Definitely.
But he wouldn't be able, because of the close touching and the closeness, he has to stay away from school at this time.
Okay. So that's the reality. You know, a lot of patients come in still with their kids, and they're actually trying to find out why can't the kids go to school. You all know we had this debate in the beginning where people wanted their kids to go to school. Some people didn't want the kids to go to school, and a lot of persons were not understanding. So as we already know, we know exactly what COVID-19 is. It's caused by the novel coronavirus. We know that it's spread mostly by respiratory droplets. It could be through coughing, sneezing, touching surfaces that are infected, and as a result, persons tend to get illness that affect their lungs, and by that, they present with a flu-like illness, but it's actually worse than a typical flu, where persons could actually be hospitalized and placed on a breathing machine. So as a result, just for protection of the kids, we have at this time kids allowing to stay home. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Dr. Allick?
That is, I mean, you basically touched everything. I mean, kids, think about
I can hear some background. Somebody wants to joining with us? Or did they forget to mute their mic?
Probably forgot to mute their mic. But okay. Yeah, if at any time you want to add something, that would be good. But yeah, understanding that kids are, kids are wonderful, but kids are social beings. And social distancing is something that the average kid cannot understand. I mean, even when it started out, it was hard for adults to actually understand it too. But the easiest way to begin the protection was that of keeping the kids within the home environment. So you realize the kids, the orders say that kids should not be brought to the supermarket. They were disallowed from coming to school, so they had to go to school on the online platform. And they were not allowed to have Sabbath school. In fact, even right now, Sabbath school and Sunday school are the kids should not go to Sabbath school or Sunday school. That's part of the orders too. Why? Because kids, you cannot stop a kid from touching the other kid or from being up in their space and everything of that sort. Even right now, planning for school reopening, it's going to be a hassle. How do we do this? All right. So if we keep the kids at home, then we protect them from bringing stuff home to their parents, to their loved ones, to the vulnerable, to the elderly. All right. So that was the reason for kids being the first ones to get shut down and the last ones to get reopened, basically.
Definitely. So I just want to remind persons that this is not the doctors talking. You really want to hear your interaction because all of these scenarios were brought to us by people. So they're real scenarios and we just want to hear what you're thinking. And then we're going to give you our guidance. There's really no wrong question, no wrong answer, but just for us to be able to discuss at this time because we are not really getting enough of these forums so that we can do that. So the next one is this. You're at work. A colleague says she feels sick. What questions would you want to ask if you suspect she has coronavirus? Anybody?
What symptoms are you having? What are you having a headache? What is your temperature like?
Okay.
Are you feeling nauseated?
Okay. Very good. We're hot. As my grandmother would say, we're hot. Right on it. Is there anything else you want to ask her?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, I guess generally when you're feeling sick, you should stay home from work, especially if it's something contagious like a cold or a flu. Those things, if it feels bad enough, you should just stay home from work.
But she's at
So,
work already.
Yeah, I'd probably tell them it's best that they take the rest of the day off.
Okay,
Well,
so you're not going to
I'm a teacher. Yeah, I'm a teacher, so I would probably see if I could help out by holding their class for a period that I may have free or whatever. But yeah, it's best that they would take that day off.
You are a great colleague, I must say that, but definitely both of you are absolutely correct. So you definitely want to know how long. I see Ramming wrote in the comments, how long is the person having the symptoms? You could definitely ask if they have things like a fever, a cough, a cold, any runny nose. Something very important to ask is if they're having problems breathing, because yes, you do want them to go home and rest, but if they're having problems breathing, you may have to call the ambulance. Now remember, particularly with this virus, you get other things like loss of ability to smell, loss of ability to taste, you get headaches, the person just generally feels unwell, fatigue, loss of energy. And in some cases, not often, you can also get joint pains. And you may want to ask, have you traveled recently or interacted with any person who has those symptoms? And the reason for these questions are this. What if now her results come back positive? You just interacted with her. I think it was Duncombe that spoke just now. You're a school teacher. She calls and say, Duncombe, thank you for holding my class, but my results are positive. What do we do in a situation like that? And a lot of our workplaces don't actually tell us the protocol for when a colleague comes back positive. If you've been following the news, we had Wendy's, they had a positive case recently. Scotiabank had a positive case about a few months ago, and a lot of companies are popping up. This is the reality and it can happen. So now this person is a colleague of yours, they came back positive, you remember the symptoms, so you're like, hey, you start to think to yourself, do I have any of these symptoms? You may want to notify your boss that you've been exposed, so now you have to go into a possible 14-day quarantine. You want to be calm and also kind of write a list of the persons you remember interacting with. As a teacher, that makes it a little more difficult because now you have an entire class of students that you potentially expose, and then you're also going to wait on surveillance to call you, or you might call them yourself And then it goes on from there. You know, we will then go the route of testing, which, as you know, is a swab in the nose. We'll go the route of putting you into 2 categories, one in which you could self-quarantine at home. And we could talk a bit about that, because many persons going to self-quarantine and not know what to do, or you may have to do the route of isolation in one of our quarantine centers or the hospital.
Hey, listen, I listened to your question and I started getting scared myself, right? and the reason being is because, boy, by the time you even get to ask that person that question, you're already done exposed, right? So
It's true.
What that means is that if we understand that we're in this pandemic, that means even your colleague and all them guys and stuff, you were supposed to have been a certain distance from them in the first place.
Oh, definitely.
If you're in any setting with them, both of you should have been wearing your mask in the first place. Why? Because it prevents the see. Okay, so for example, this person now tell you they have symptoms, and then they turn out to have a positive test, and
Yes.
now the whole cascade of looking into who you were exposed to, this and that and the other. Now you're on the list. I mean, that's no questions asked. However, that is not it's not a quote unquote life sentence or death sentence. Why? Because if both of you are wearing masks and both of you are social distancing, it is still highly unlikely that you would have picked up the virus. Now, if you were not social distancing and if you were not wearing your mask, or if you were, you know, sharing surfaces, touching surfaces, all the rest of those things, and you're here putting your hand in your eyes and in your mouth and the rest of those things and stuff, then there's a higher chance that you could have picked up that illness from your friend. All right. So, you know, so that's a deep question. That's really a deep question. So it able to know the symptoms, and they
Yes.
don't just chalk it up to, boy, this is just my sinus, right?
Hey, coming to that one. Hey.
Okay,
I mean, really important question and important discussions now.
okay, Duncan,
Yes.
go ahead.
Yes, what I wanted to ask, what is the difference between the medical grade mask and the ones that we wear? Is it easier to breathe fresh air with a medical mask on, or what's the difference between the medical masks and the cloth ones that are made locally? I guess.
That's
I
an
totally
awesome question.
your
Yep.
question. When you say if it's easier to breathe, I think it depends on the person. From me personally, I find with the medical, there are 2 types of medical grade masks that we are using during this time. There's a surgical mask, which is that mask which just has, it's almost like a blue mask. It's kind of rectangular that comes around the face. That mask is pretty easy to breathe in. Usually you could do most things. The only thing I found difficulty was while I was in the gym. I found that one became a little difficult, but that one is usually the easiest to breathe in. The other mask is what we call the N95, which is a higher grade in the sense that it protects you from even smaller particles, particularly things like a virus, in this case, a coronavirus. That mask is a bit more difficult to breathe in, especially when fitting correctly, because the problem is people are just walking around with them on, but the fit is wrong. It is not too much about a difficulty breathing. You can actually teach yourself to breathe a bit better under it. Most of the time, it's just the anxiety of feeling like if you're in a closed room. So persons tend to be a bit claustrophobic. They tend to say to you, "Hey, doc, I feel like I can't breathe." So it's just a matter of being calm, and it's not the easiest thing to do because I do find at times I feel a bit claustrophobic under them, but you do have to remain as calm as possible, and it tends to be a little easier to breathe under. But definitely comparing to a cloth mask, the particles that the smaller the particles are, will be able to pass through a cloth mask. But little experiments have shown that even with a cloth mask, you're protecting yourself and the other person. That's why now the new guidelines just say a face covering as opposed to specifically the N95 mask.
Yeah, that's a very great point. See, now I work in the emergency room. As I tell people, I get to face the enemy head on, right? So I have to be protected, right? So I'm not, it's not like I'm going to the supermarket where I can stay a certain distance from the people around me. I now get to get down and dirty in a closed space with a patient with coronavirus. All right. So I have to have a certain level of protection. And I have to be able to protect the air around me from, I have to protect my airways from being able to take in the virus, right? So that's different from you being now on the street where the aim of everyone wearing a facial covering, it's like the Christian walk. I tell these pastors, I say, listen, man, there's so many sermons you could preach on this, right? If everyone wears a mask, it ends up conferring protection to everyone, all right? So the cloth masks are more, they're not as much protecting you from the stuff that you breathe in. So you're not taking a cloth mask and going into a closed setting with coronavirus patients and hoping that the cloth mask will prevent you from breathing in the virus. However, viral particles live in droplets. Droplets come from your mouth when you talk, from your nose when you breathe out, from your mouth when you sing, when you blow the instrument, and all of these things. So when you have a cloth mask or a facial covering, it prevents all of these droplets. If you realize you wear a mask for a long period of time, the mask starts to get a little bit damp on the inside, right? If everyone can block themselves from putting out these droplets and keep their own droplets to themselves, right? It would prevent other people from picking up their droplets, all right? So with everyone wearing a mask, what it ends up doing, it confers protection on everyone. Now the N95 masks, they're interesting, right? When the first time I started wearing them, man, by 3 hours I went there, I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Eventually I got accustomed to wearing them. This is so awesome, Sunita. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Because for me, I thought it was a death sentence. I'm like, oh my gosh, these people telling me now I need to wear N95 every single time I come into work. That is crazy. Yeah. Right now, I wear an N95 for 16 hours sometimes because there's sometimes I'm at work for 16 hours and I wear it for 16 hours and it's fine. I have no problems doing that. And I'm driven by the fact that I have to protect my family. I got kids at home. I got a wife who's vulnerable. So I have to protect them, so I wear it. All right, so the N95s are for the medical professionals. The facial and cloth masks are for the public. And honestly, there's really no major risk documented of wearing a facial covering. Be very careful about these WhatsApp forwards because they say some stuff, but there's no real risk.
I have a question for you, Dr. Allick.
Yes.
So you're talking about wearing these masks, right? But at work, I know for sure at Doctor's Hospital, they take your temperature before you come in. I understand they take it at least twice. So if they're taking these temperatures outside before you come in, why do I still need to wear a mask at work?
So you asking me that?
Yes,
you asking me
other
that?
people may have the same experience. Other people may have that same experience. You know, they go to work and I see now you go in the gym and they're even doing the little temperature checks for you. So why do you still have to wear a mask if you're doing these temperature checks?
So you have to understand this, right? This is something, one is that this is a virus that we know little about and we're just learning a whole lot of things about it in terms of how it moves, how it inhabits the body, what it does, all the symptoms and everything of that sort. And then you're also understanding that if every little step matters. So just like how, for example, Social distancing alone is not going to protect you. So 6-foot social distancing, if you just do that alone, is not going to completely protect you. Hand washing alone is not going to protect you. Facial mask or facial coverings alone is not going to ultimately protect you. When you put the three of them together, you remember what the Bible says about the three-pronged cord, right? It's stronger, right? So what that means is that if you social distance plus facial mask plus hand washing, my gosh, now you have a much stronger protection. So it's the same thing like me going into work. So temperature check, it's a general screen. It may miss some, it may take some, but it may identify if a high temperature is found. Good. Does that mean that I'm completely asymptomatic? I don't have any temperature, so I'm fine. No, because there is the concept of the super spreader. That's the person who has viral particles in their nostrils and their mouth. They don't have an actual illness, so they're not sick. They don't have no fever. They're walking around us just like everybody else, but they're still breathing out those particles. All right, so I use viral. We use temperature checks, but I still wear a mask because I'm still going into a closed surface, into a closed environment, and I'm going to be interacting with people. So you use every little ammunition that you have, and when you put everything together, you're ready for the battle.
Good. So it sounds like we have to put on, as they say, that full armor so we could be out there protecting ourselves. So this is another question to our general audience. And you're at church, you know, we are actually back in most of our churches. We're back in our physical churches. And we have a sister in the back of the choir. I'm just going to choose a color, Sister Brown. She's in the back of the choir, and every minute she goes, she keeps coughing, you know? So somebody approaches her and say, hey, you know, you're coughing. And she's saying, no, it's just my sinuses acting up. I'm good. What do you do? I see our host starting to smile. You can take this one if you want. What is the protocol for your church? What does your church do if this happens?
Encourage her for the sake of the brethren, so that they're not becoming overly concerned. It's something to separate herself even more, maybe sitting in the fellowship hall, as we call it, and listening to the service there, but also to get herself checked for that cough and tell her for her own benefit, because she's in this unique category now, to stay away in case somebody in church is sick. So I'm telling her to stay away to protect herself, but I'm also at the same time protecting others if she is sick.
Hey, but you got some people in the fellowship hall, you know.
Everybody's supposed to be in church.
True. But I love in terms of your approach. You sounded so gentle, like it was a very gentle approach that you did with her. At the end of the day, you have to protect not just her, but the entire church. And even though she's insisting it is her sinuses, you cannot take that risk. We actually had a case where one of our very own colleagues thought her sinuses were affecting her. And we encourage her to go and get checked. And when she was checked, she was positive. So you cannot take something as simple as a sinus for granted. You do have to be very proactive, even if it is somebody who sits in the church and has a big function like the choir or an elder, a deacon, a pastor. You do have to encourage them to get that checkup, because you do not want to affect the entire church at large, okay? So I thought you were very gentle in your approach.
I have a question.
Sure.
A couple of questions.
Love it.
I'm gonna ask them and maybe you can identify, bring them all together. One, that 5G is helping to spread COVID-19. Two, it was manufactured in a lab and released. And then can you explain why they do the nose swab as opposed to just temperature? I think you've explained that in part. And then the quarantine, what it all is involved. If I had to quarantine, like I may have to take my son to school in early August, When I come back, will I have to quarantine? If I do, exactly what does that mean? Quarantining, self-quarantine.
Okay, I'm gonna take them one at a time so I don't stumble over. So the first question I believe was related to 5G. So as Dr. Allick said earlier, we continue to learn so much about the virus. Now, when you think about I would say the chemistry or the pathophysiology, which just speaks about how the virus is spread and how it's made up. It being traveling through radiation, which 5G tells us, it seems quite unreasonable or impractical to believe that it travels through 5G. I'm more the person who always says never say never, so hence my answer is very cautious. But based on what we know so far about the virus, we know for sure that it's a respiratory transmission, and that is via those droplets that we spoke about through coughing, speaking, singing, and also when those droplets touch certain surfaces. So to say that it's related to 5G, I would have to take a backseat on that one and probably say no. What do you think, Dr. Allick?
So it's a bit of a stretch, and let me tell you the reason. And just the other day, the lady who was doing the training for our deacons in terms of cleaning and janitorial services and those things, she was explaining, and she put it this way: the virus is kind of a dead particle, kind of, meaning that it cannot live on its own. It has to get a host. So it's itching to get a host. So that's the reason why, for example, you leave a virus on a surface, it will die after a certain period of time, or it will quote unquote inactivate after a certain period of time, all right? The 5G, which is a wave, it's a radiation wave, it would be a bit of a stretch to suggest that 5G can actually transport a virus, all right? If we realize we see the viruses getting transported in droplets, which means it has some water, some, living particles, some sort of protein, some sort of something that allows the virus to sort of live in it or thrive in it and be transported. So to think that it could go through a microwave, an invisible radiation wave particle that really just makes a wave form like this, it would be kind of rough. And then the other thing too is that it is being spread around the world. I mean, somebody put in a comment there, which is really awesome. It is being spread where 5G is not being used. So that means, so it kills even the concept of people thinking, for example, oh, the heat would kill it. The summer, it would have disappeared in the summer. Why is Florida now a hot spot, and Florida is in the middle of summer? We have a massive heat wave going on in those parts, and the coronavirus is still being spread. Mm-hmm. So that kind of killed that whole WhatsApp forward that was going around saying that the heat can kill it, right? So yes, I mean, some things, when you put it together, if it doesn't really make logical sense, it probably may not be forthcoming. All right. So yeah, I mean, we flooded with that information, and many times it puts you to think, but when we really do the logic of it, it doesn't really add up.
So the second question was if it was made in a lab. Now, I'm always the one to think if I wasn't there, I cannot say where it was made. What we have seen based in what's being published is that they believe it was originated in Wuhan, China, around the market. They believe it was related to bats, and this was due to genome typing. Now, we've reviewed some of those articles. Many of them seem very factual, but until everything is over, until we have all the information, we will not be able to say. To say whether it started in a lab and some person then took that specimen, injected it into bats and so forth, that's a possibility. But again, we will not be able to say. What we can say is that it's here, whether where it came from, and we have a role to play to get it gone so that now we can get back to that thing we call normal. But to say whether it was made in a lab, I wouldn't be able to give that answer without more information.
Yeah, we can close out the discussion on that. That's fine.
Okay.
We could continue to the next question. It would be the same thing I'll be saying.
Questions he did ask. The next question was about quarantine, and we're going to come right back to that one because we're going to interject the questions. We love them, but we really want to give persons cases that they could use today, and then we'll get to that quarantine, because quarantine, that's a great question. We kind of talked about it earlier, but we can definitely expand a bit more about on that one. So this one is, you're in a Wednesday night service and we have Brother Black. He's the oldest member of our church and he comes in with no mask. You encourage him to put that mask on, but he's like, well, child, I live my life already. I don't need to wear a mask. In a case like that, what do you do? And I'm talking about in the physical church. What do you do? What do you tell Brother Black in this case?
Wear a mask or go home. No, seriously, we had someone
rough.
I got a balance. I was soft, so now I'm hard. I'm balancing out. We had someone who came to church today without a mask, and they asked him to sit in the hall where basically no one was, and they went out and got a mask and put for him to wear. And then he was able to come inside church.
Okay. And this is why we place this scenario, because it's going to happen. You are going to have persons who are not going to wear that mask for whatever reason. Some persons are not able to see the virus, so they believe it doesn't exist. Some persons are going to watch television and see a lot of persons in the States refusing to wear a mask, so they're not going to want to wear it. Some persons are going to believe that they're inhaling back their CO2, so it's going to cause a physiological change, so they don't want to wear it. But the reality is, as a church, if the guidelines stipulate that we must wear it in public places, we still have a duty to play and to comply. It's not just about a law, it's also about protection. We spoke about droplets coming out, and if I'm wearing a covering, I'm protecting my droplets from affecting other persons, and when that person wear a mask as well, they're giving me the courtesy of protecting me. And I had a person, we were just outside chatting, and I had this older gentleman ask me a question. He was just like, what's the big deal of wearing a mask? He was just like, persons aren't dying like they were before. And I said to him, I don't want to take it home to some person who's more vulnerable. I know it's very easy in situations to say it doesn't affect me, but you are going to interact with some person who it affects the most. And I work right now at the COVID center, so I can tell you our last patient we had was 21 years old. So COVID is not like reading a book and saying, oh, you look too young, I'm not going to touch you today. No, it can affect anybody. So you do have to be stern. If the recommendations say no mask, to wear a mask, that's the recommendations. You have to make sure that persons wear it, or unfortunately they cannot come into the sanctuary. And if it comes to a case that a church member cannot nudge them gently for them to do it, you might have to call the authorities, and that's the reality.
Yes.
Let's take Jay, and then we're going to go back to the question since he has his hand up. Go ahead, Jay.
Sure.
Okay. Good evening again. I have so many questions, but this is one of the big ones. I am not certain, but I am almost sure that I had a bout with this virus probably about the 3rd week in March.
You had a what? Sorry, could you repeat for me?
Yeah, I have a feeling that I may have had this virus around the 3rd week in March. Now I'm not sure, but I had a fever, and and some very bad pains and lack of appetite and stuff for about 2 or 3 days, right? But then I had some natural remedies and got over it. But I'm not sure if whether or not that was the COVID-19 or not. But is there any way to test persons to see if they have developed resistance to the virus already, or it's still just the test to see that if you're COVID-19 positive or not? Because I'm not really interested so much in the test, in the COVID-19 test, but
Okay.
I'm more interested in knowing if my body has already developed a resistance to it.
So I'm going to take the part A and let Dr. Allick take part B. So the first part is you're not really interested in if you have it, but there are two tests currently that we're using. One is the antigen, which is what we call the PCR test. And what that test tells us right now is, do you have the virus now? So that's the test. If you had to travel, they would recommend that you take for them to give you entry into the country. If you suspected that you had it, that's where the antibody test comes into play. And with that test, it tells us that your body would have been presented with the coronavirus or the antigen at some point. And as a result, your body had to build up some what we call antibodies to fight against the virus. And as a result, you have this antibody present in your blood. Now, in terms of resistance, that is where it gets a bit difficult. I remember that Barbados in particular was trying to check COVID levels and to check to see if a person builds up resistance. I remember reading in the literature, there was a case where they thought persons built up resistance and were not able to get it again, but then these same persons were reinfected. So to answer if there is a resistance test, I am not 100% sure that the test is 100% efficient as yet, but I'll definitely let Dr. Allick join in on this one, because that's a great question.
Awesome question. So, I have some information on that. I mean, I did a town hall meeting with our physician colleagues, and we sort of we brought in some of our own people who worked in New York and those places, and there's a lot of information that we learned then, right? And Dr. Belgrave is right. There have been documented some cases who were COVID positive, lived through the course of the disease, then were tested negative, and they do duplicate testing to ensure that their test would have been negative. And then some weeks later, they came back and they were positive again.
Yes.
Those documents labeled them as having had a reinfection. So now we still cannot tell, and we don't know yet, because there's still so little that we know about the virus, whether it was a re-emergence of the same virus that was in them versus actually catching it again from somebody else, right? Now, that being said, in the States, you realize that they do two types of testing, and even even at doctor's hospital too, there's a test called the antibody test, right? The one where you stick the swab up into your your nostril. I had to drop that in there. I had it done myself. Oh my gosh, it's interesting. But
That's funny.
it has to be done, right? So they stick the swab up there. They're looking for viral particles, and you're looking for what is called antigen. Then there's the test where they take your blood, and they're looking to see if the body mounted a response and produced antibodies to this virus. There's the IgM, which is the sort of short-term memory. So within the past month, you would have had exposure to it. There's the IgG, which is the long-term memory, which means that it probably would have been months or something like that, so you may have had exposure to it. But the point is right now, they still cannot guarantee that people with the IgM or IgG even have resistance to the virus, all right? So although that test may tell you that you do have an IgM positive or an IgG positive or anything, does that mean that you're safe from getting the virus again? We still don't know. The experts still cannot tell us, all right? So right now we're still in the stages of getting to know this virus. and so we can answer that question. So are you foolproof if you have gotten that infection before and you're now infection free? No, you still got to protect yourself. Then the other thing too is that coronavirus, don't forget, COVID-19 is only one exact type of a family of coronaviruses. Some coronaviruses cause the flu. So then you have the issue of what you got. Was it the flu? We don't know. Understand? So it's hard. All right. The point of it is that right now nobody is exempt. Nobody is foolproof. Nobody is, you know, it's like chicken pox where you can say, hey, you know something, I got it already, so I straight. We just don't have enough information to be able to make that conclusion. So everyone is still encouraged to take the necessary precautions and to just continue being vigilant as we protect ourselves and protect others. All right?
Yes.
I think that's my input on that.
So Vivo, did that answer your question as well, or do you need a little more? Because I see in the group you say, are there no other tests, or is a nasal swab test all that we have? Did Dr. Allick answer your question?
Yes, he pretty much answered it, yes.
Okay, good. All right, so I have another one, and it's kind of tricky. So we're in the middle of a church service right now, and the deaconess notifies the pastor that we just run out of hand sanitizer. Interestingly enough, about 10 minutes later, the water goes off. How should the service proceed?
End it immediately.
The pastor didn't yet. What are y'all gonna do?
End it. Go home.
I'm with Pastor Rami on that one.
End it and go home. What is Charlie Miller? What are you saying? C. Stewart say end church immediately. Y'all not gonna give the pastor a break?
Yes. I say in a case like that, water's off. Definitely, you need to explain to the congregation what's happening. And with this case here, with COVID-19, I tell people it's like flying a plane while it's under construction. Because first they said, oh, it's only the droplets will go but 5 to 6 feet, then it drops to the ground. Now we're hearing, I saw some article where they had 200 doctors sign something and push the World Health Organization to admit that the thing is like an aerosol. And that raises my question on the face mask. Can we just wear the face mask alone and still be protected? Because if it's like an aerosol, aerosols move through the air and circulate and do all of that stuff. And so if you only wear the plastic mask, it can still get underneath. And then my question also has to do with the eyes. If it can be contracted to the eyes, they say, stop touching your eyes, don't touch your face. Do I need to constantly keep my glasses on? Do I need to come to church with goggles on that, you know, that you swim in and have a tight fit?
Okay, so you did raise some interesting points, but let's just complete this quick question. So Dr. Ali, the question basically is in terms of if we were in the middle of a church service and the water went off, we ran out of hand sanitizer, what we do. And basically the church says, you know what? Let's end church immediately. But host, you know, you never give me your name.
Sorry, Lyndon Williams.
So, right. So Brother Williams, with his gentle approach once more, said, you know, we are going to have to explain to the brothers and sisters what is happening, and we're going to have to end service. And I totally agree. But it's just that we need to be mindful of these scenarios that can happen. Now, some of our churches are very blessed in that they may have some water tanks outside. And in a case like that, you may not have to end service because of the backup that is available. But if there's a time where there's going to be some type of compromise with hand hygiene, we may have to end church. Now, Brother Williams posed another point, and that was in relation to the way the virus is transmitted. Right now, they're recommending wearing a face mask, but what if I just wear a face shield? They keep saying, don't touch my eyes, so is it transmitted via the eyes? So what I'll say with that is, with the face shield, because the sides and the bottom is out, you do have a risk of transmission a bit higher than the actual mask. So it's not just about talking. Many times persons can sneeze, and if you can imagine you sneeze, that shield might actually get knocked off your face depending on what you're doing. Now, I do not believe that when they say to you, don't touch your eyes, it's because the transmission is via your eyes, but it's because transmission is via surfaces. So if you were not cognizant and you touch your eyes, then you go from there, you touch the chair, and then you go from there and keep touching different surfaces, you're constantly transmitting this virus before you got a chance to wash your hands. Because the reality is, if you go into the bathroom right now to wash your hands, or you even put hand sanitizer on your hands, you're not going to turn around and put hand sanitizer on your face as well. So as a result, you don't want to be touching surfaces because you don't want to be touching your face or your mouth, because you're going to cause a reinfection of your hands if you just went, wash your hands, and then you put your hands back into your face. So a lot of the guidelines that were given was just for more practical things. They kind of foresee things that persons will do and not realize it. And as a result, they say, okay, try not to touch things, and every minute you get, wash your hands, sanitize your hands. So that's where it comes from. But before you chime in, Dr. Allick, I also want to say that, Brother Williams, you also bring another point. You know, you talk about touching your glasses, but there's so many other things that we touch that we forget to sanitize. So I don't know how many of you have your cell phone nearby, but I'm sure that while on this call, you probably touch your cell phone at least once or twice. Some of you may have a watch. There you go. I don't have my keys, but Dr. Allick has the keys. And if you're like me, you know, as females, we tend to have to walk with our handbags. If you went to church, you probably walked with your hymnals and your Bibles. How many of you are taking a Lysol or a disinfecting wipe and cleaning those things down? How many of us are remembering to disinfect these particles? So I thought you brought a really good point when you said touch your glasses, which also needs to be sanitized.
Okay, so don't want to touch on too much, but I want to talk on the face shield because wearing a mask does it's a new normal because it sort of, you know, limits interaction sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. So somebody goes onto the stage and the first thing they want to do is just take the mask off completely because they want people to see them speak and they want to see their expression, etc., right? We're in a pandemic. You have to understand that. If you can keep your mask on, honestly, it's better to do that. That's the first thing. The second thing is, now, every little bit helps, right? So if you were to compare wearing a face shield to wearing nothing at all, remember that the reason that everyone is putting on some sort of covering is to prevent their own droplets from going out.
True.
the droplets go out from your mouth, from etc., and it goes a certain distance and drops. All right, in most cases. When you're indoors, especially in air-conditioned buildings, it poses another factor to the whole thing, because now when you speak or sing or project anything and those droplets come out, the currents from the air condition can actually take them and spin them around the place, right? So now, is it possible that when you put a facial covering over your face, that when those particles come out, they can probably land on that face shield and prevent a lot of particles from getting out there? And the thing is a yes. Is a face shield as good as a facial mask or covering? It is a no. Is a face shield better than nothing at all? It is a yes. You understand where I'm coming from?
Yes.
Do the math. There's no 100% of anything. The ideal for a church setting with everyone inside of a church in a closed space with the air conditioner on is that everyone should have a facial covering. Not, you know, I don't want to say anything else much apart from that. You see, and that's the point. It's a protection of everyone around you. If everyone is covered, everyone is protected. If one person is uncovered, nobody is protected. That's the long and short of this thing, you know. I tell you, there's a sermon on that. There's a sermon on that. Listen, you see, we're looking out for one another. I mean, and actually, that's what Christianity is all about, you know. You understand? Christianity is looking out for one another, looking out for each other. And basically the deal is that when I wear a face mask, I protect my fellow man, then is there harm in me doing it? You understand me? Should I think of it as too much of something to do? And by the way, a question that was something that was said about the rebreathing of the carbon dioxide. There's been a lot of forwards on that, including a nurse. There was this nurse from one of these ICUs, and she put a whole thing out there about rebreathing carbon dioxide and everything of that sort, and say when you're hyperventilating, they give you a bag. Remember, guys, oh man, where's my paper bag? I don't have a paper bag here, right? But if they put a paper bag around you because you're hyperventilating, and the aim is to get you to rebreathe your own carbon dioxide, right? They put the paper bag tightly over your face, and when you breathe out, the paper bag blows up like this. And when you breathe in, the paper bag compresses and crushes back against your face. That is called rebreathing of air. When you have a facial cloth mask covering over you, when you breathe out, it doesn't expand like a balloon, does it? No. When you breathe in, it doesn't contract back like a balloon again, does it? No. So you are not rebreathing your oxygen. Yes, the droplets that end up trapped on the cloth, all right, because you're sitting with them around your face. Yes, you're getting very friendly with your own droplets, but they're your own. Keep them. Ain't nothing wrong with you keeping your own droplets, right? I mean, trust me, I'm just trying to explain the logic of it, because sometimes people overthink it, and of course those. You know, it doesn't help when we see all of those different forwards and those different messages and everything else. So then you just kind of get paranoid because like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die because I'm rebreathing my own oxygen. Now about the people that die, there's some people that say, oh, the people die with a mask on because, you know, they were exercising and then all of a sudden they fall out. Poof. I want to touch on that too, because some people were scared about this, right? Yes. But 1 in 50,000 young people has sudden death while exercising, while in the gym and everything of that sort. That's established literature that has been there for 25, 30, 40, 50 years. If you put a face mask on them now, wouldn't you still have that 1 in 50,000 being able to drop off and stuff like that? So now you put them on the news and you say, well, they had a face mask on. So it's the face mask's fault, right? Automatically, you've introduced a bias there that may not necessarily be entirely true. You understand me? People die from other things. You understand? So yes, if you're in a wide open space, you're on the park and everything else, so then you decide you're going to do a 100-meter the rate at which you need oxygen going in and out of your nose and mouth and stuff, yes, you probably should not be wearing a mask at that point in time. But you're going into the public, you're going interacting with people, or you're going around the environment of people, please put your mask on. There, in terms of risk, the risk of transmission or catching coronavirus is greater than whatever other risk you think that putting on a facial covering confers onto you. When you balance it off, it is better to put it on. I hope that answers or makes any sense to anybody.
So we have some questions in the chat. The first one looks at quarantine. How do I self-quarantine if I'm at home? In terms of that, it really depends. So usually what we do when you get the instruction for self-quarantine is we ask you a few questions. How many persons are in the home with you? How many bathrooms are in the home? How many rooms? And are you sharing these things? If we have a case where there is a separate bathroom and room that the person who has symptoms can use, then self-quarantine can possibly happen. So basically you will use your own room, you will use your own shower, and try to segregate from that person as much as possible. If, however, you live alone, it's much easier. You just utilize the things you need. You utilize things like takeout services where you have a delivery option for things to come directly to you, and you can actually work with our surveillance unit for assistance. But if you are under the orders of a self-quarantine, you're definitely not supposed to be going to church at that time because you have to protect your brothers and sisters. You're not supposed to be going to places like the supermarket and other public gatherings. So that is how self-quarantine works, and how we try to make sure that persons are doing that. The surveillance unit normally checks in via a video chat throughout the day with you to see how you're doing, because it's not just about physical distance, but emotionally it could be draining on some persons. Does that answer the question for you? Okay, so the next question I see here from, it looks like a Shelly. How safe is taking temperature? And when you say safe, I'm going to assume that you're speaking in terms of our screening, in terms of how efficient is screening with temperature checks. So firstly, there are different types of thermometers that are used to check the temperatures. There is a contact and then a non-contact type. So the non-contact type would include those handheld devices you see persons using, where they kind of point it to your face, kind of like a gun, and they give a few seconds and you hear a number, it just goes peep, and you get a value. Now those tend to not be as efficient as contact thermometers, obviously, because there's no interaction and it depends on how close you are to that person. However, we still use it. Why? Because if there is a temperature that is a positive that you've captured, if there's no temperature, there's no guarantee that there is a temperature there. With the contact thermometers, particularly those ones you place under the arm, you place under the tongue, the ones that touch the temples, those tend to be a bit better, but no temperature alone can tell you if that person has the virus or not. What we use is something called a case definition. And our current case definition says, if that person has a temperature, which is anything greater than 100.4, if they have symptoms like we spoke about earlier, like a cough, a cold, shortness of breath, loss of appetite, etc., if they had a history of travel or in contact with some person who had traveled, then they're what we call a probable case or suspected case. And so now we take that person into further testing. But just because you have the absence of a temperature, it doesn't necessarily mean you do not have the virus. And so that's when our index of suspicion has to go up. And so we may have to test persons who may not be making that case definition. but the temperature is a screening tool. So if you do have a temperature, automatically you need to get further screening done. But if you do not have a temperature, it does not guarantee that you do not have the virus.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll let Dr. Allick take these next two questions. One is from our pastor, how to wear a mask. And the second one is asking in terms of passing the microphone. Charlene, if you could help us by just telling us a little more about what you mean by passing the microphone as Dr. Allick answers these questions.
So you wanted Colleen to speak now? I think I get the question.
She's typing for us. She's typing for us.
She's typing. Awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. So so wearing a mask now. The mask is supposed to be able to comfortably fit over your nose and mouth. It is supposed to be snug over your face. I know there's some serious designer masks, right, that people have been wearing, and the mask sits over them like a cup almost. And then when you look at them, there's a big space over their eyes, right? And you could almost like sprinkle some dust over their face and it'll just drop right into the mask. That does not confer the protection that you really need, right? You need a mask that, in fact, actually, even some people are very creative, and to save money and everything, they take the t-shirt and they flip that over and make a nice mask that just comes like a bandana and rests over the nose and mouth. I mean, that is also a way of doing it too, all right? So the layered masks are actually pretty good in that you have not just one layer of cloth, but you have a couple layers of cloth. And that's actually pretty decent too in terms of blocking the droplets from coming out. You need the mask to be able to, you need to be able to comfortably open and close your mouth, and the mask don't drop down from your nose. Because if it does, then that means that mask is inadequate, right?
Yes.
These are things that I see, right? And then, you go to the supermarket. I once told the security guy, I said, listen, I say, boss, these temperature checks you're doing, I say, I think you should be a little bit more vigilant in making sure that you're packing boys and these people don't walk around with masks sitting right on their mouth here or sitting under their chin, because it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing, and everybody is still being placed at risk. So that's the thing with the mask. And honestly, you can safely sing with the mask, you can speak with the mask, you can, you could even sleep with the mask, right? And I'm talking from experience, right? So
before we finish the mask, we have two more questions related to the mask. So when you're finished, just to get those answered before you move on.
No problem. And then the other thing is, and I put it in the chat there. Reusing masks, people. The facial mask. Remember, I just told you that if you put that facial covering on for 2-3 hours, you have a nice amount of droplets sitting on that facial covering. When you reach home, take that off and just drop it in the washer. All right. And you can nicely hold it from the ears here, so you wouldn't be touching your face, you wouldn't be touching your nose, you don't want to be readjusting and touching the mask and touching your face. You just hold it from the ears or from wherever it hooks on, and just lift it away from your face and drop it into the wash, or drop it into wherever it is that you're dropping, okay? So frequently washing your mask, or after each use. You don't want to take that mask now and rest it down in the car or in your bag, and you say, oh yeah, tomorrow I could just reuse that. Then you have moisture sitting there in really messed up environment, and you don't know what now starts forming on this mask, and you want to wear it the next day, okay? So I hope that serves as guidelines. So you should have multiple masks, all right, if you're having the reusable ones that you can just cycle and recycle, all right?
Yeah.
Washing in between. All right.
Answer part of one question, and that was from Pastor Green when he asked if there's any particular care that should be taken when wearing face masks. So you did speak about the post wearing of the mask, which is the care, but I guess in terms of wearing the mask, you do want to avoid touching the mask as well, because if you are protecting yourself, you're assuming that the area that touches your face is the clean side and the area that faces other persons is the dirty side. So if you're constantly touching that dirty side, you could then go and infect other areas and then reinfect yourself. The second question though was, when you, oh, here we go. Can I just cover my mouth and not my nose? And I feel like you did answer that when you noted it must cover the nose and the mouth and fit snugly, kind of creating a seal. So the N95 mask we spoke about earlier is the only one that really gives you a seal. The facial coverings, which would include like the surgical mask, there's no seal, but it should still fit properly. And then in terms of the cloth mask, they are supposed to fit correctly. And as Dr. Allick said, need to be washed between every use because those ones are not Okay, so just to go on to the next question in the group, and it was in terms of passing the microphone. I do not see the details on what the person meant with passing the microphone, so I'll just generally
answer that because
okay,
we did have some guidelines for that with respect to passing the microphone as we were preparing, for example, reopening protocols.
Yes.
So it is. It's advised that you not pass the microphone. That's the whole point. Now, when you hand the microphone from one person to the other, you're sharing objects. All right. So one hand is placed on the microphone, whatever it is placed on the surface, and then it's handed over to the other person who now places their hand on the microphone and touches the same surface. So you're basically sharing surfaces, which is unhygienic. All right, that's one.
Definitely.
Two, so now there are the multi-directional mics which sit a certain distance from your mouth, and you can speak into the mic and you're not taking anything from that mic. All right. So if you have a stationary mic which is multi-directional and you can stand a certain distance from it and speak into the mic, then it would be safe for somebody to come speak into the mic, leave, another person come speak into the mic, leave, and it shouldn't confer any major risk, right? Yeah. But so they in many of the church reopening protocols, they did suggest that if you have, for example, a praise team or something of that sort, that one person would have that cordless mic would be dedicated to that person until the entire church service is over. So these are little techniques that you can use, to prevent sharing of or contaminating really other hands and back and forth. All right. So yeah, but sharing of the mic is not, handing or passing the mic is not a good practice at all.
Yes. So I have a question now because I'm not, okay, so Miller placed in the group, what about the handling of the microphone or the passing of the mic from member to member? I'm thinking that also a way to spread germs or to spread the virus, and you're absolutely correct. Also, you would find that some people take their mask off to better project their voice, and there's saliva coming from this person's mouth. Isn't this also dangerous? Absolutely. I know that persons feel as if you cannot speak well or project your voice with the mask on, but it's just similar for me when I got my braces. When I first got my braces, my speech changed. It felt weird. I had to relearn how to speak, and that's the same thing with the mask. You can speak with a mask on. I did have a very interesting conversation last week when a church member said to me, but the Minister of Health took off his mask and spoke into the mic. And I went quiet for a few seconds and I respectfully said, well, the correct thing to do is to still speak with your mask on. So we are going to see persons who are in high authority not particularly doing the correct thing, but it is okay to speak with that mask on. It may take a little practice, but it's quite possible to do.
All right. All right.
So I see another question. What is the recommended mask for children going back to school or for them to wear in the public? So the first thing is that we know children under a certain age, particularly those under 3 to 4, we tend not to ask them to wear masks because of the risk of suffocation. Otherwise, you can get the cloth mask for the children so that you can reuse it, and they can wear surgical masks, but I do not believe that we have a size for their faces at that tender age. So you probably want to get a custom-made cloth mask made for the children when it comes to back to school.
And you can teach them now, you know, so that they can get accustomed to wearing a mask. I mean, my children have fun putting masks on. Like, Daddy, do we get to wear masks now? It's like, oh my gosh! And it's become, you know, their little outing. You know, their little outer. Even sometimes they wear it and they're not really going anywhere, but they just wear it just to pose and everything, and that's not a problem. And by the way, the suffocation risk in children younger than 2 is not because the masks are a danger, but it's the fact that the kids have not developed the innate the reflexes that are necessary to shift, to reposition, and those type of things if you are heading towards suffocation. So therefore, it's a safety issue with the children. You know, just like how, you know, if you have a stroke patient who can't swallow, they've lost their swallowing reflex. You can't go stuffing them with food. You understand? It's it's the same situation there. That's the reason that we don't put them out. And the other thing is that little kids are obligate nose breathers, meaning that kids have not even gotten the reflex of being able to breathe with their mouth when their nostrils are blocked. All right, so that's why young kids, if you realize you're 4 months, 6 months, that they catch a cold and they're just so fussy and miserable. You know why? Because they're fighting to breathe through their nostrils, although they're clogged, and they don't know anything different. All right, whereas we adults can figure out ourselves. All right, so kids do not wear masks. It's not recommended for kids to wear masks.
Yes.
By the way, I see something in the thing. What's a hijab? or a hijab, or whatever it is.
Oh, a hijab. It's like
Hijab, yes.
that is worn in the Muslim. I would have responded to Jennifer, and I said to her, it depends on how much protection you want from other persons. So basically, it's just a cloth covering, again, just like how the person would have pulled up their shirt. It's worn by Muslims. They tend to just have their eyes out. So it covers their forehead and it covers their nose and their mouth. So they can wear a surgical mask under that, or just like a shirt, they could use that as a facial covering. But the type of face mask that you use depends on the type of protection that you want. So particularly if I'm going into a patient at work, I will always use an N95 because I want full protection. However, if I'm going around family and friends, honestly, I wear my surgical mask because the N95 is expensive and they're not in great supply. So it just depends on the amount of protection that you want. So yes, it is also a facial covering, but it depends on the amount of protection that you want. So I have a very good question for you guys now. So you know that the Prime Minister is going to address the nation tomorrow. I'm sure you saw those flyers going out. Now imagine this scenario happens. The Prime Minister goes to address the country tomorrow and he says, Bahamas, we've had a surge of cases. We are in the second wave. So we are going to return to lockdown. And now he says, you know what? We're going to extend it for 2 full months. He goes on to say, all church services and gatherings are now canceled. However, an elder doesn't like this. He disagrees with this and decides to hold some private church meetings in the basement of his church, of his house, sorry. What do you do? This could be anybody. Pastor, this could be you. What are you going to do? Anybody in the congregation, you got invited to this nice little basement private church meeting, what are you going to do?
My answer is simple. After the church has been informed, educated, the government has issued a mandate that you to stay home.
Mm-hmm.
One, nobody's be opening the church for meetings. Two, if members choose to go, they go at their own risk. I am not encouraging anyone to do it. And the member who does it, I don't know if I'm gonna see that person too positively as a pastor that, hey, you flouting both in this case church as well as government rules, so to speak. So I'm gonna sort of find a way when we resume. I'm gonna probably discipline that elder or that member and tell them you need to sit down for a little while and catch yourself. But no, I'm definitely not going to encourage that sort of thing, because if something happens, then the church gets blamed.
And you sure you don't want to say that that's state oppression? You know, they're trying to restrict our freedom of worship, right? Because
Yeah.
but
I
that's
prefer
what
freedom of life over freedom of worship.
no, that's what there. In fact, there was a news article in the States where they were suing the government and stuff like that over quote unquote freedom of worship in this case. You know, we have to be, as Christians, we have to be prudent, right? So freedom of worship, I mean, even right now, and I want a lot of people to understand this, right? Even in this pandemic, using the Zoom platform, you know, there was a meme that was going around with a conversation between Satan and God, quote unquote. You know, so Satan says, "Listen, man, I shut down all your churches," right? And God responded, "Hey, I've just set up a church in every house," right? While it could be cliched, it could be, you know, thought of as a blag and everything of that sort, but if we really understand this thing, the gospel, the spread of the gospel on the online platform over the airwaves. I mean, you remember we were making all kind of money for 3ABN so that this thing can reach all different parts of the world and everything of that sort. Here we actually have an excellent opportunity to reach places that were initially unreachable. We were asking about how do we get the gospel behind the, you know, gated communities and the walls of goodness knows where and stuff, and people who would not, you know, put your alligator shoes on and come into the dirt of a tent meeting. Man, we have this opportunity right now. What are we doing with it as a church? What are we doing with it as people, as individuals? You understand me? Don't rush, don't be in a rush to try fight the government and fight the rules of the government. Listen, once the rules are not in contravention of the law of God, we Christians should be law-abiding citizens. You understand me? We should be the ones being responsible. All right. So just be careful of that. You know, when in your passion you probably get misguided to think that something is oppression when something is indeed something for your safety. It's amazing that remember in the Old Testament when the Israelites came out of Egypt, they were like what? In fact, the counts, they say that there were almost over 2 million of them, right? And there were rules set up that said that, listen, you had to go to the priest, right? And if you had brown spots and they had white at the edge and the this and that and the other and so on and so forth, he'd declare you unclean. You would go off into quarantine and you would stay there for a week or 2 weeks or whatever and stuff. Then you'd come back to the priest again to get checked the next week. And if they're brown now with the dark as opposed to the white, then he can declare, okay, now you can go back and rejoin the public. But if not, then you have to go back and you have to keep shouting unclean and those kind of things. What that means is that principles of things like quarantine and isolation and those are not recent things. These are things that go back as far as the Bible. The priest was the doctor at that time. You understand? So be very sensitive to these things and don't just rush to think of something as oppression and you know, mistakenly, because all it isn't me. Let me tell you something. It's interesting. I tell people, listen, exactly when you were exposed, when you touched the carcass of a dead animal, You were deemed unclean for 7 days. You had to wash in the water of purification nonstop for 7 days before you could rejoin your tent. That's the way they decreased that. That's the way they got diseases not to spread and cause pandemics across the entire flock. You understand me? When a woman was in her period, she was deemed unclean for a number of days too. And you understand? They didn't have hand sanitizer and detergent and washing machines and those things in those days. And you know, they in fact, they even tell you that, listen, even the stuff in your tent, when you had certain illnesses or when you touched certain things, even the bottles in your tent were deemed unclean for a certain period of time. You think, oh, God didn't know that viruses can live on certain surfaces for a number of days? We just finding that out as scientists now. You understand me? Please don't put God in a box. All right? So be vigilant, be prudent, obey the laws of the state once they're not in contravention of the laws of God. And just understand that, you know, it's a responsibility that we have to our fellow men to protect each other. All right.
So I do love the response that you gave, and I brought that up because what we did found initially when a lot of lockdown orders were given is that many church organizations felt that they were being oppressed of that freedom of worship. And I remembered, and it actually just took me back to childhood. When growing up in Sabbath school, you would hear all these stories about persons in the Bible not being able to worship. And they had to, because I remember when I was growing up and I was in Pathfinders, my grandmother would say, you must always learn your memory texts. And this is in case a time comes when we as Christians are unable to worship, that you remember the word of God and be able to come out and say what his promises are and to go back to his blessings. And that's all I felt when the lockdown happened. I said, you know, I'm not able to see my fellow believers, but now I'm supposed to be able to exercise my faith. And yes, it was difficult, but it's not that the state is against the church. It's just that drastic measures have to be put in place in order to save lives. I did see Pastor Green's hand up. Is there something you want to add, Pastor Green? Okay, so while we're waiting, I did see a question from Dunkerman. They noted that the US population is quite drastically large. So far, there's been recorded deaths of over 140,000 over 6 months of COVID-19, which amounts to less than 1% of the population. And do we feel that the drastic or economic measures that are being posed are necessary, or have we overreacted? Now, this is how I will answer that question more from a personal feeling. I do not think that any measure is drastic enough when it comes to one life. If there were just 200 persons that died, I would have done the same thing. Why? Because every single life for me as a health professional is my duty to see how I can save that person. Because at the end of the day, it may be less than 1%. And this is when you're looking at numbers, but there's no amount of numbers that could replace a mother, a father, a brother, a sister. And that could have been my family. You know, so for me, whenever I have a patient in front of me, I have to go all out. If we could have done something to prevent the 15 deaths that we had in the Bahamas so far, we would have, because our aim was that if persons had to be infected, okay, but we did not want any lives lost. So for me personally, I did not feel like the US did enough when it came to it, but that's just me personally. I honestly think that lockdown should have been implemented earlier. Mandatory wearing of masks should have been earlier. Social distancing. Right now, most of the people there are actually fighting against simple protocols as simple as wearing a mask. And when this happens, lives are affected. And when people are affected, lives are lost. Like every day having to wake up as a physician and knowing that every time numbers go up in Florida, those people could potentially come here and now affect the people so close and dear to my heart, that kills me. So I don't think that it was an overreach, and that's me personally. I feel like it's better to be aggressive up front and save 100% if you can, and then relax the laws later, because it's about the greater good. I think too many lives were lost here in the Bahamas, and that's my take on that one.
I can go a bit deeper than that. Okay, so there's a couple of things. One, there are a few countries, and it's interesting. I would almost have to go back to read to be able to quote all the information for you. But there were a few countries who initially started out laxed, and they're for fear of not having to lock down and mess up the economy and stuff. And when it started overwhelming them, they had to go back and do the same thing and shut down. All right, that's one of the issues. So therefore, the whole drastic economic measures is either you do the drastic economic measures early, or you end up getting forced to do them late. That's one. Two, you have to think of the clinical capacity, or your capacity of your hospitals and those things, right? Now, what we find is that if the pandemic were to just go uncontrolled, you just let it run buck wild because you're looking for herd immunity, etc., etc., the collateral damage is going to be endless. You realize in Italy and those, when a bunch of young people started dying, they realized, oh wow, what we thought initially that, oh, the young people wouldn't really get bothered by it, it wouldn't kill them that much, and so on and so forth. It went completely against what they thought, and they found out a whole lot of young people died, and then you had a whole lot of population die. Listen to me, let me tell you something. You realize all of these health messages we've been going on and talking about the Bahamas and all this, that you 79.8%. There are so many undiagnosed chronic illnesses in our population. If COVID were to run buck wild in our population, trust me, the collateral damage would be ridiculous. Then you have to think of the fact that we only have probably about between 20 or 20 something active ICU beds at Princess Margaret and 8 active ICU beds at Doctors Hospital. Our population is 400,000. How would you think we're going to manage that? If we were to let COVID run buck wild, so many people would be infected, even coming through our healthcare systems, that by the time we check it, our numbers would not be 0.004%. Trust me, they would be way higher. So we have to be very careful when we think of the other side of the coin to, just leaving the drastic, the drastic measures and those things. And we're also not talking about the people who died in their houses because they could not come and seek medical care because of the fear that they had because of the overwhelm of the coronavirus cases that were in those hospitals. All right, there's a whole lot to be taken into consideration. There's a lot that we do not know. All right, so just it's it's a thought, and it's a reasonable opinion when you think of the other ways in which it could have been handled and everything. But a lot of things points to a whole lot more disaster if it were handled the other way, as opposed to doing lockdowns and letting it trickle in slowly at a controlled rate. So just be very careful with that.
Okay.
Okay, fair enough.
Sorry, go ahead. Someone is speaking.
No, I said fair enough. I accept that answer.
That's great. So as I see no more questions in the group, I'm going to just ask one last question, and this is going to be to everyone, okay? So next weekend, the Sawgrass Mall in Florida is having a closing down sale, okay? I'm talking about the biggest sale they've ever had for their lives. They're giving you 80% off on everything. 2 of your buddies call you up and say, hey, we've booked tickets, we've booked a hotel. All you need to to do is come. You ain't paying for nothing except for when you get to the mall. What are you doing?
I'm gonna order mine online or tell them they can bring it. And when it gets here, I take a solution of bleach and water and wash and wipe everything down. The computer I'm using, when I got it, I wiped the entire thing down with sanitary wipes. My daughter said, but it ain't used yet, Daddy. I said, that's okay. I don't know, but I was glad that it was in storage for a couple of days before I got it. So I know whatever was there, if a virus was on it, it needs a host to live on. And so it can't eat plastic. So I figured by the time as I got it, it was dead, but I still wiped it down anyway.
I think that's one prep I won't be taking. And I always say, free things, there's always not good. So in that situation, that trip definitely not good.
Shelly, I love it. I see her say, I'm going. Satisfied with what I have for now, even with 80% off. So this question actually highlights non-essential travel at this time. Even though the borders are opened, the international borders are opened and it's basically free for all in terms of going, it's really in your best interest to do what's best for you. We cannot tell you do not travel, but based on all the information that you've been hearing in terms of how corona is transmitted, measures that you have to take, what the test involves, which is a nasopharyngeal swab, which goes down the back of your nose and touch your throat. All these things, you have to be able to make a calculated decision and a decision that's in your best interest when it comes to travel. So it's very refreshing to hear that members are doing what is best for not just them, but also the church at large when it comes to protecting of themselves. And if there are any more pressing questions, we are definitely here and available. So we'll kind of open up the floor for if there are any closing questions. And then if not, we'll hand it right back over to Pastor Williams.
Yeah, so seeing that there's an awkward silence, I'll just give my closing remarks, right? Listen, we're here to look out for each other. That's what Christianity is all about. This is new, this is crazy. Mm-hmm. We've not trod this road before. Let's just try to look out for each other. I mean, this information, what you've just been armed with, just like how the memes and the bad news and those things spread like wildfire, you should be trying to do the same from your end and encourage. I mean, speak to the people who are within your sphere of influence. You understand? It may not sit well when you all of a sudden show up with a total stranger and say, "Hey, your mask on wrong," right? But you can influence your family members, you can influence your friends, you can influence the people who you go to church with, and all of those things. All right. So, whoa. I just saw this questionnaire video circulating.
Very interesting.
Kenyan president submitted secret sample from invalid subjects, including a goat and papaya. Positive. How is that possible, especially with the papaya? And also, are doctors being pushed to increase numbers to make this thing bigger than it really is to push the world's agenda? Okay, so here's the situation, right? There are some questions that I cannot answer. Just like I cannot tell you whether coronavirus was produced or COVID-19 was produced in a lab somewhere and there's some mastermind behind it who's trying to create anarchy and create this and that and the other and so on and so forth. I cannot answer that question. But I can tell you that a colleague of mine, well respected, well esteemed, died, you understand me, prematurely because of coronavirus. All right. I can tell you because I work in the emergency room, and I won't tell you the number of people that I see. And this, you talking to two people here She works in the COVID center. I work in the emergency room at Doctor's Hospital. We've diagnosed a lot of these patients, and we've cared for a lot of these patients.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter where it come from, where it going, or who behind it, but the actual, when you bring it personally and you bring it into our environment, it is real. You understand me?
Definitely.
I don't care who benefits from the monetary value of the testing and the test kits and those type of things. That really doesn't matter to me at this time. Is the life what I see in front of me and the vulnerable person who's next door to them and the whole community and country who is at risk at this present time. That's what matters to me at this point in time. All right. So honestly, all of those, and by the way, every test has, and there are some false negative rates in certain tests, all right, and not all of this is to sit down and go through the exact definite numbers of those things. Like, for example, the antibody test, there is a sensitivity to it, but there's a specificity that is low, all right? So having a test result doesn't exactly say that this thing is foolproof, but that's the best that we have. Just like if you CT scan 100 people with appendicitis, there are going to be 6 of the people that have appendicitis, and the CT scan is going to be said to be normal. But that's what it is with every test. We're not God, we're not perfect, but we do the best we can armed with the equipment that we have and the talents and the brains that the Lord has blessed us with, right? So therefore, from the take-home message is that of being careful, understanding the recommendations, not stressing too much about what you cannot control.
True.
Taking charge of what you can. All right. Oh, last one, the Ministry of Health.
Wait, before you go on to that question, just want to add about if doctors are being pushed to increase numbers to make this bigger than it really is. We cannot speak on behalf of everybody, but I can definitely speak on behalf of the doctors in the Bahamas because I sit at the COVID center, as Dr. Allick says, and also I'm very big in assisting with some of these feedback questions. And I can tell you that is not our agenda. There's nothing that we are pushing. Quite frankly, if we could be able to put Corona in a box today and just let it disappear, we would do that because we are tired. I, for example, do not normally work graveyard shifts because I work in clinics and my entire sleep pattern is off. I work every single weekend now. Every shift is almost at midnight. I don't touch my personal bed most weeks. I'm in a hospital bed. So if we could stop this, trust me, we would stop this in a heartbeat.
Did I mention I had to isolate myself from my family for a certain period of time?
Yes.
I had to sleep in my office. I had to stay away from my children. I have vulnerable family members.
Yes.
I had to be stripping down in my garage. Listen to me. Let me tell you something. This thing for physicians, at least I can tell you about the physicians that I know and communicate with, is a rough patch. This ain't no easy something, man.
It is not.
Nobody can pay us enough for us to opt for this thing. There's nobody who can pay me enough for me to opt for this thing. You have to understand that.
100. Going back to particularly when it started, how Dr. Allick said he had to strip outside. Basically, because I work in the center, we're not even allowed to wear our own clothes there. So you're going to work in one set of clothes, you're switching into people's clothing, and I'm a size small. The only size available is a large. So I am swimming in those clothes at work. And then I have to use their shower at work before I come home. And I'm talking about a government facility. So you could understand, like mentally, it has been taking a toll on us. I remember calling Alex some evenings and was just like, when is this going to end? So there is definitely no agenda when it comes to the doctors here in the Bahamas. I can tell you it is very tiring for us. We just want it to end as much as you do. And also when our colleague passed away, that was a piece of us that left as well. So it's a very hard task for all of us. And we definitely have no agenda that we're pushing. So I do see another question here. Has the Ministry of Health viewed the protocol for the airlines coming into our country? And how does the Ministry of Health ensure that these tests are valid coming from guests you are allowed to come in the Bahamas? So we do not sit on the Ministry of Health's team, so we will not be able to speak on what their protocol is. Basically, how it works is that we have different teams across the Bahamas that's helping in this one fight. So as I said, I work at the COVID center. So my duty is that if the ministry calls me, if Dr. Allick calls me, if any clinic or hospital calls me and say, I have a patient that is a probable case, it is my duty to swab that patient, determine if that patient needs self-isolation or isolation within the facility there, or quarantine at one of our other facilities, and treat that patient. When that result comes back, it's also my duty to call that patient and give them the result if they're under self-quarantine, or if we have them, if their result is negative, sometimes we have to then and transfer them onto PMH for further treatment. The Ministry of Health's job also have a group of physicians that deals with revision of protocols, of which we are not doing because it will be too tiresome for all of us to get involved. I do believe that they are reviewing the protocols when it comes to the airlines, but sometimes the information that different physicians feed into them, they're able to use that for protocols. But to say that we directly influence them, that's currently not the case.
There are some jobs that I do not want and do not envy. I'm sorry. It's you know, I'm empathetic to the people who are in those positions to make those decisions.
Yeah.
I do not want it myself. I will also throw something at you to think. The Bahamas is a bucket list destination. You know, so people, you know, people will not want to give up their Bahamian vacation. So, and then we live in a world of unscrupulous people who will try any and everything to try circumvent the system in any way, shape, or form. People have broken into FBI's mainframe and put a bug in and pulled stuff out. People have broken into every possible thing that they could put security on. So you think when it comes to things like coronavirus tests and stuff like that, that people wouldn't try things?
Of course.
Right. You understand me? So I mean, the government, I mean, I'm very empathetic to them, and I'm very, you know, I have to pray for them myself. You understand? Because I know they're doing the best that they can, but that's all that they can do. They can only do the best they can, and it's really a tough balance, you know, between the safety of the country and and also the economics of the country and everything. So yeah. Honestly, we are to pray for our country, to just pray that God will help them with the decision making to you know, to strike that balance and to be able to take care of people. And also, we just have to, at the end of the day, render to Caesar what is the Caesar's, and the things of God's for God's, and leave what, you know, what's their responsibility. We shouldn't be trying to take that on. That only just creates stress for us. All right. But brighten the corner where you are and do what is necessary for you to do. Recognize your responsibility.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Drs. Belgrave and Allick. We really appreciate it. It's quite informative. I don't know when we'll be able to have you back, because I know, as I told them, those of you, rest of you, I told them privately, I sent them a message. I said, I want them to go and get some rest, because I don't want them too tired and prescribing penicillin when they should be prescribing aspirin. So because of the shifts that I tremble when I hear doctors have to do 36-hour shifts. I'm like, who invented that? It needs to stop. So if it's still going on, shut it down. If they still making people interns do 24 hours nonstop, I don't care. If you got bed in the hospital, stop it, please, somebody. I don't want to go there and somebody too tired and write the wrong thing and it's so close and the nurse don't think about question. No, stop it. That's madness. Better to wait 6 hours in the emergency room. So thank you, everyone. Hope it's informative. I've recorded it. Dr. Allick, you can probably give me some guidelines tomorrow whenever you catch yourself, whether I can just share the link with others or just keep it as an archive for individuals to hear. I just will let you and Dr. Belgrave make that decision. But thanks, everyone. Let's close with prayer. Father in heaven, we give you thanks for the information and the knowledge that you have given us through our friends and colleagues. We ask that you will be with them as they work on the front line along with all healthcare workers. Keep them safe, keep their families safe. Help us to make the right decisions to bring things under control, even if it is an inconvenience to us. Help us, Lord, to look to you and trust you. Trust those who have our best interests at heart. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So I just want to say thank you again for inviting us, and we definitely enjoyed the discussion with everyone, and we look forward to chatting more if you ever need.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Yes, thank you both, doctors. It was very informative. More persons should have been online to hear.
Mm-hmm. They're probably mad because I fussed them a bit Wednesday night in church. But I was gentle.
Gentle.
Thank you, doctors, for sharing such valid information, and we will continue to pray for you as you continue in this fight. God bless and have a good evening.
Amen.
Thank you very much from Anglican Church. We heard everything. We appreciate it. It was wonderful. Thank you very much. We are here, Pastor Williams. 17 of us. 17 of us.
Wow.
Okay.
Amen. Amen.
Nice.
That's awesome. Yes, that is good.
I'll be ending the meeting at this point.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Night.